So today's theme is understanding ESG certification, particularly B Corp or EcoVadis. What are the considerations in undertaking a program of work like this? Why? What are the drivers? What are the benefits? How do you actually go about it? Lessons learned from the experts. This is a question we're seeing more and more from companies of every size. It doesn't matter whether you're a major international pharmaceutical or a two or three person business with a retail shop. Some are being asked by customers to complete EcoVadis. It's a stipulation from everybody from HSBC Bank and NatWest down to Accor Hotels and beyond. Some are looking at B Corp because they want to demonstrate responsible business credentials. Others aren't sure whether they need certification at all, or whether they should start with something more focused, such as greenhouse gas reporting, policy development, or supply chain evidence. Yeah, we know it's a minefield. It's complex, but the big question is how do you make these decisions? What's right for your business? So in this session today, about 45 minutes, it's not about pushing one route over another. All these certifications are good. It's about helping you understand what each option is, what it's for, when it adds value, and how to decide which pathway is commercially sensible for your business and your resources. And if you're a larger corporate, this session should help you think through regulation, supply chain risk, procurement expectations, operational efficiency, and how ESG certification can or could support stronger due diligence across your organization and your supplier base. And on the flip side, if you're an SME or micro business, this session should help you understand how ESG certification can support customer retention, improve your tender performance, or strengthen your credibility. You can increase your company value. You can respond more confidently when customers ask for this evidence, because we all know every single tender you put out there is 20 or 30% of it is all about sustainability. And the key point is that ESG certification should not be treated as a badge. It should be treated as a business decision to drive the growth of your business. That's an absolute. And for some companies, the right answer might be better to do nothing immediately, but you have to understand the risks of waiting. And for others, the right starting point might be greenhouse gas emissions, because it gives the company a measurable baseline. And it's the first practical step, and it's required everywhere. But for companies facing stronger customer, investor, or tender pressure, the right pathway maybe fuller ESG alignment through standards and assessments frameworks, ESG frameworks, such as B Corp or EcoVadis. And the direction you take depends on several factors, including company size, sector, customer expectations, tender requirements. What evidence do you have at the moment? How complicated is your supply chain? What's your budget, internal capacity, and so it goes on. So in the next half hour or so, we're going to explain the differences between B Corp and EcoVadis, look at the types of companies each route tends to suit, share the challenges we see when delivering our consultancy in support of clients, and we're going to explain how ESG certification can create commercial value when it is approached properly. It's not a tick box exercise. And by the end, you should have a clear idea as to the best route, or at least what questions to ask of us directly. So that's enough from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Joe to lead us through this minefield and see what we can do. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks very much, Humperdinck. Some good points there, and I think we're going to start off talking really about why ESG matters, and I'm going to sort of try and break this down from a corporate point of view, what's happening in the market, and of course how the connection with the SMEs, and then really how the sort of corporates are driving pressure into the SMEs and what the SMEs can do to respond to that. But hopefully you'll get a feel from today about being on the front foot, being more proactive, I've prepared a little bit of content. I'm going to see if I can share that. If not, we can. We'll be all right without it. But if we're looking at ESG, just really from a start point, if we're looking at a corporate landscape at the moment, the regulatory compliance tends to drive the main focus. And the reason that the supply chain has been impacted is because corporates have realised that their emissions, they started with 1 and 2. Quite frankly, I think it was quite a weak start point, but they've realised that 90% or more of their emissions reside in their scope 3. Therefore, they need to engage with their suppliers if they're going to achieve their net zero. Of course, off the back of many of which, or most of which, have already committed to a net zero journey, and they've got the shareholders and investors looking at what they're doing. The corporate regulatory landscape, there's some new things that are happening. So the new one that will be arriving this year is the ISSB standard, which is actually climate risk modelling. So what that will do is therefore put additional pressure on that supply chain to look at where those climate and associated risks are. And also we're seeing an emergence of, there's been a lot of focus on company footprint reporting and supply chain. We're now seeing the emergence of actually product-based footprints. Some of that is driven from a regulatory point of view with things like the CBAM in the EU, but we're now seeing digital passports emerging. And I see very much in the UK, particularly in certain sectors, for instance, the construction sector, where there's a lot of focus on embodied carbon in build space. For companies that are aspiring to connect and do business with the public sector, in April last year, there was the new Procurement Act launched, which is putting additional pressure on anybody wishing to bid for business. And the government made a pledge that 30% of the spend annually would be awarded to SMEs in the event of them actually stepping up and being able to present themselves. And then if you look at the NHS, just recently in April of this year, they've launched the NHS Evergreen, which means that it's mandatory now to be at level 1 on this assessment. So that goes beyond what's required with the public sector. And with the Evergreen, what's happening next year, there'll be pressure to report on all scope 3 categories. And in April of 2028, coming back to the product carbon footprint again to do business within the NHS. And I think, Humperdinck, you said, it's about 80,000-ish companies that deal directly with the NHS. And if they then have to go into their supply chain, well, what's the number? Is it 1 or 2 million businesses in the UK?
It's way above 2 million businesses impacted. And we've had clients approaching us from India, China, Switzerland, Norway. Just in the past 2 weeks, these clients have come to ESG Pro to support their NHS Evergreen submissions. And of course, this is a lovely segue into the theme of the today's meeting, because to achieve NHS, the higher levels of NHS Evergreen certification, that's 2 million businesses who fundamentally are looking at having to have an ESG framework certification.
Yeah, Humperdinck, am I just so I'm checking? Is there?
It is displaying. You might want to go full screen, I think, Joe.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Start slideshow.
Yeah, thank you very much. There we go. So anyway, we've covered the point on this one. There's only literally a handful of slides here. The bit on the far right is actually investor and stakeholder pressure. Coming back to the point I made earlier about companies committing to net zero, investors and shareholders are really looking at this. And we also see an emergence of those companies that are looking to exit at some point. But
excuse me, Joe. Could you open your PowerPoint in slideshow mode? It's a tiny preview with your notes. It's okay. I don't think anybody can read it. Okay.
It was there in the rehearsal, Humperdinck, but start slideshow.
I think with power cuts and
yeah, is that better?
Not showing anything at the moment, Joe, but
got it here. Well, if I look at, I can basically stop stop sharing that. If we look at what customers are asking for, I've talked about, and I think we've had this before, where some companies, we think ESG, and some people think ESG is about just the environmental aspect. So the natural position to start with is looking at sort of carbon footprint reporting. And there's a lot of pressure now, certainly if you're looking to do business within public procurement, to report on scope 3, 5 of the 15 categories. And also what we're finding with the large organizations is that some of which are putting pressure in particular on their tier 1 suppliers to actually have some standard or framework, which will lead nicely into what we're going to be talking about with EcoVadis and B Corp. And I generally find where we've got the large organizations, they're using EcoVadis basically to push out this to their suppliers. And this is mainly because if you've got, it could be thousands of suppliers, but let's say if you've got 100 tier 1 suppliers, you want them to be completing something that you've got consistency to track those 100 suppliers. So that's where EcoVadis makes it a lot easier for those procurement teams. And of course, with B Corp, generally speaking, not always, I find that B Corp is self-driven, where companies feel that they want to do something, they're purpose-driven, and they go down the B Corp route, with their B2C, because of the B Corp identity works really well. And of course, we've got the supply chain risk I mentioned, and what's now happening, we see, Humperdinck made a point, I think earlier, 20% or 30% of evaluation is around supply chain. And in fact, what we're seeing, the social value can be normally 10 to 30% of a decision based on social value and impact. And I always think that is not just for public sector. It actually works in the same way for corporates, because many of those large corporates have made commitments again around KPIs for business with SMEs, but they want that social value and impact. The major challenge is now what's being asked for is social value at a contract level, as opposed to what you're doing in a company. I've had examples where someone's got a base camp in Winchester, they're doing business in Durham, and they weren't interested in what they were doing in Winchester. They wanted to know the impact where the contract is being delivered in Durham.
And Joe, I think the key point for the audience here, when considering, look, these guys were supposed to be talking about EcoVadis and B Corp. What's all this social value and carbon? Because this is the real point of being able to secure an ESG certification through any one of these frameworks, is being able to demonstrate that you know your supply chain, that you do have your carbon reporting, that it is far beyond scope 1 and 2, and importantly, that your carbon report has been verified by a third party. Because if it's not, you're not going to do very well.
Well,
it's not only the verification, it's the completeness. This is why 5 scopes of scope 3, right? Not just 1 or 2. Business travel, that's a giveaway. Everybody does that. It's doing going deeper. All of these points Joe's just mentioned: supply chain, social value, carbon reporting, the authenticity and completeness of it. A lot of demands also, not just on the net zero statement, but that the net zero statement has been prepared, designed according to or aligned with the SBTI, science-based targets. And even these are changing quite drastically immediately. SBTI have introduced a significantly stricter measure of how your targets are to be validated. This is all your preparatory work for certification. There's one other point I think we should just touch on. It's about having a sustainability management system. Now, this is probably news to most people. What is it? Think of it as a document management and workflow system, so you actually have a single repository in your business where all of your evidentiary data, your policies, your records, your certificates, where they're managed and stored and organized and actioned upon, because the whole process is about continuous improvement. Any thoughts on that, Joe?
Absolutely. And I think this comes back to, we're going to talk about B Corp and EcoVadis in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to talk about the approach that I'm seeing, and I think I've got a brilliant example, which was myself in a previous business that I was a co-director with, where we had very much one of our top 10 clients. It was a tender came round. It was a housing association, heavy weight, 20% weighting on ESG, and we really struggled. It was fluffy responses, and we were talking about stuff that we would do in the event of us winning the contract. Anyway, bottom line, it was £1 million contract. We were not successful, but I was on very much a reactive approach to that potential contract, and we lost them, albeit they were very, very happy with us for over a decade. On the other hand, then I commissioned, and actually, interesting enough, the link with ESG Pro was born then. We commissioned ESG Pro to help us build our own ESG rating. We were about 15 million turnover at the time, 30, 40 odd people. And we then went on the proactive front foot with our other top 10 clients and saying, look, this is us. And we went through an uncontested, 2 examples, uncontested tenders with those clients. And I generally, looking back, feel that was that proactive approach off the back of, dare I say it, a massive kick up the backside. So, but I think the strategic approach to ESG often is a bit daunting for some. They struggle with just carbon. And then the thought of doing the full ESG for some companies is quite scary for different reasons. So I think what we're going to do now, hopefully, is just talk about the differences of aligning with a framework or standard. And the main options that we see really, there's a sort of the GRI-led approach with a sort of a global ESG rating. We see that with very, very large businesses. But today we're going to talk about EcoVadis and B Corp and really the differences. So should we just talk, Humperdinck, just generally about B Corp? Do you want to just sort of open where you find B Corp winning and what it contains for customers, what they need to be focusing on?
Yes, I mean, I like to break it down like this, Joe. B Corp is, like you said, they're purpose-driven. The B Corp client will tend to be the person who contacts us and says, we want to do this because it's the right thing to do. It feels good. True values driven. It's not because a major client has told them that you must. B Corp does have its limitations because it's a very high quality program. It is a genuine, albeit remote audit of your documentation, your evidence, but it's also highly scalable. So it suits very well the business of 1 or 2 people as it does multinationals. In fact, right now we are engaged with a Japanese financial services and retail corporation of well over 5,000 people, and they are determined to become the very first B Corp corporation in Japan. So it suits everybody, but it depends on the message. The difficulty with B Corp is the annual fee structure. Once you are turning over more than 30 or maybe 40 million pounds a year, the annual fee can be a bit questionable. But that's okay. Yeah. But the big strength of B Corp is it speaks to consumers. You can't, you can barely turn your head these days. Products and services, look at the food, and whether it's the food in Waitrose or the likes of, well, the big certain high street brands, very big on B Corp. Consumers respect it. Yeah, and the evidence is, well, the evidence, I just made this point, the evidence is consistently over the last 10 or 15 years that consumers will pay a premium of 5 to 9% for products and services deemed to come from a sustainable company with a B Corp certification. They love that.
Yeah, and I think going back to your point about the logo sitting on a product, you're walking down the aisles thinking about what product to look at. I know there's been a big focus on food, nutrients and transparency on where things have come from. I think if people pick up something, it's got a B Corp logo, naturally it means they probably don't need to do the rest of the reading of the label, and they can make a better decision a lot quicker. I think with B Corp, that's sort of pass or fail, and very much it's being marked against you as a company, what you're doing, and Humperdinck alluded to that sort of annual assessment. And I'm definitely seeing, I mean, the other massive thing with B Corps at the moment, I think it's just over 2,700 in the UK, and they're starting to sort of do business with each other because naturally they see it as a sharing the same values and purpose. And there's a huge network in the UK. In fact, I attend various events where everybody that there is a B Corp, and they just collaborate, share best practice on what they're trying to do on various streams of work. So I think there's a huge community that's growing at pace in the UK, and that sort of cross fertilization of business. So where B Corp is a pass or fail, if we look at EcoVadis, it's about continual improvement, and there's multiple medals that you can attain. I mean, the badge at the beginning is a commitment badge, which I think, quite frankly, is, you know, you've made a start, but really you're not going to broadcast the fact you've got a committed badge with EcoVadis. And then really you move through bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. And really what you're being measured against with EcoVadis, the same four key pillars: environment, labour and human rights, sustainable procurement, and ethics. And there's 21 measurement areas underneath those four pillars, but you're being assessed against your peers in your sector, your region, and size, which means, and often we get engaged, I think half the time when we're engaged is where companies have fallen back from silver to bronze or bronze to committed. And they're saying, Joe, we've just put the same information as we did last year and we've gone backwards. And I think if you're doing nothing and your competition improves, then quite frankly, you're at risk of falling backwards. And that often happens. And about 50% of our engagements absolutely is where that is. But the four pillars, really what you're looking at is that sort of continued improvement. And I do find that sustainable procurement is often the weakest link across the businesses. And we put a big focus there on things like code of conduct and doing ESG risk assessments in the supply chain. And of course, we can turn all of that effort into a beautiful social value and impact, which then translates into presenting to your potential customers, whether that's public or commercial, around what you're doing from a social value and impact. So that's a huge benefit.
And Joe, I think I spend a lot of time working with private equity companies of all shapes and sizes, KPMG, Lloyd's Development Corporation, and many others. And when a business of whatever size they are, and this truly holds true for global corporations, right down to, you know, the successful SME, really going for their first round of funding, right? We're at £50 million. We've got £1 or £2 million EBITDA. Let's grow. We're ready. First thing, every single one of these PE companies demands of that business they're investing in is you will do EcoVadis and you will do it to an acceptable standard, which means not just the entry level certification. So, yeah, B Corp is of huge importance to grow a business, to gain traction, especially with consumers. And if you're seeking investment, however it comes, don't forget, 75% of institutional investors would direct their investments into ESG companies with an ESG foundation, and they're looking for the evidence. If you want investment, if you want growth, it has to be EcoVadis. And the corporations themselves, you know, they're using Sustainalytics and other global financial ESG certifications, ratings. It cost, you know, the certification cost alone is typically measured in multiples of millions of pounds per year. And B Corp and EcoVadis are deliberately affordable. It is accessible by every single business out there. ESG Pro ourselves, we're EcoVadis Gold. We have just submitted today, or yet the day before, to be Platinum. We're also a B Corp. Yeah, there's also CDP, but where do you draw the line? So these are the key advantages. these are the drivers for every business. Most importantly, picking up on all of these points Joe has already touched on about supply chain, procurement, knowing your suppliers, who do you trade with, human rights, modern slavery. These are all risks. What's the point of these frameworks is actually to improve society. So when people ask, what do you do? I said, we help, ESG Pro helps businesses be more sustainable. But that means we're also teaching businesses how to look after their people better. Good governance means happy employees. Secure employees are more likely to have the capacity and the wherewithal to care about the environment. It really is very impactful. So yeah, I think we need to talk about the challenges businesses experience here. We've talked a lot about the theory as to why. From my mind, Joe, the biggest challenge clients of every single size experience is resources. They don't have a team of people. They need to find information from HR, from health and safety, from finance, from the CEO or managing director. And they're juggling these challenges and they're trying to say, well, the big question is, how are you going to help us through this? Because we can't just drop what we're doing and focus on this. So where do you take this, Joe? Because you see it. We're both working with clients.
Yeah, and I think even if you've got people you think have got time, there's that knowledge and skills about it's just such a multi-dimensional challenge when you're looking at full ESG. And I think where I find sometimes on carbon and in things with like ISO certifications, generally you might have a very small group of people that are doing the work, and you can just manage it, off the radar internally. But with full ESG, with things like B Corp, with things like EcoVadis, it is a more immersive experience. It's not about boardroom with a couple of people. This is sort of top to bottom, bottom to top, and going outside into your supply chain. So I find people are really, really nervous. And I think in marketing, ESG can give you some great credentials, but I see loads of examples where people are really nervous about talking about ESG and what are we going to say? They can talk about their company and their product and their service, but they're really worried about overstating and then being greenwashing on the environment. And of course, the new thing about, overstating social and community stuff with that social washing. But to me, if we're thinking about, earlier we talked about reactive versus proactive and about where to best sort of set off your path of travel to a potential framework or standard. I mean, something I always recommend to my clients is look at your top 10 customers, look online, because ESG is about transparency. It's about putting it in front of house on the website. So within 20 minutes, half an hour, you can look at your customer and see what are they thinking about, what are they working towards, and you'll pick up little silver nuggets. And then you can effectively then look to play back and mirror what you're doing in line with their goals and ambitions. And that mirroring works really, really well. And you know what? If you pick up the phone to them and say, I'm struggling on the supply chain stuff, could you offer me any assistance because you've gone through this? They'll be more than happy to collaborate and help you. So there's never been a topic in my working career where you've got that strength of collaboration between partners, suppliers, customers, and even competitors sometimes, just all sharing the same challenges to sort of speed up the and eliminate the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways in which our success in helping clients, and this isn't a sales pitch, that's not intended as such, but it's embedding our technology enterprise sustainability management system, our SaaS platform, into the client experience so that, look, 3 or 4 years ago, clients, we've been doing this for 10 years continuously as ESG Pro. But 3, 4, 5 years ago, it was, I want one-on-one, I want you to sit with me one-on-one, and we work through answering this question as an individual session, 15 minutes, an hour, whatever it took. Because there's more awareness about these topics, I think what clients are now asking for is, give me the essence of how I respond to this, and then work with me at a live one-on-one later to maybe polish and enhance, build up more evidence. What can I do in addition becomes the question. And this collaborative, multi-session, 1 hour, some clients say it's one person, 1 hour a week. Other clients will say, we've got 3 people who are going to do 2 hours a week. It's recognizing that every client has their own schedule, challenges, pressures, deadlines. And one of the questions people ask us was, well, how long does it take? And I can only speak for the last, speaking with reference to the last 6 months, we see on average that we will take a client from a standing start through to being audit ready in 4 months. Sometimes less. Our record is 6 weeks from a standing start on B Corp, and about the same, but it's always 2 months for EcoVadis as a minimum. But that is more the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
One thing, realistically, at a sensible pace, not being driven by the pressure of we have to have this in place by a tender or something. One needs to think of it as a program of work spread over 6 months. But I've got one of our clients, mid-size SME, we did a case study with us a few days ago. Well, no, a few weeks ago, apologies. And word for word, what the client said was, I quote it, ESG Pro completely smashed our deadline. We had a 2-week turnaround, and within days, the team had a full report ready. And I think that just sort of speaks about our approach, but the essence of it from a practical standpoint, what are the challenges to a business? Any one of all of the people tuned in here, the real challenge is understanding at the outset, what's the gap? And that's where we have a complete, so we start with a full gap analysis, which reveals to us and you how big the challenge is. A lot of clients dip in, they start with this, say, right, now we understand, now let's make a plan over what time frame to go forward. Joe.
Yeah, I think your point about the time, often I get asked about time, and realistically, B Corp, EcoVadis, if that's the direction of travel, really you should be thinking about 4 to 6 months, and then once the submission is done, there's a 2-month buffer, which is actually B Corp and EcoVadis at the moment doing their assessments. So you're realistically looking at sort of 6 to 9 months before you get the recognition. And sometimes people are thinking, well, actually that's too long, particularly if they're trying to respond to a tender or something. Or so what we generally do is get the carbon reporting part done first. We can sort of nail that with often 4 to 6 weeks. Get that work done. We also give people a letter of engagement, which says that they've commissioned the services to work with us, building towards an EcoVadis or B Corp assessment. And that adds extra weight and gives the customer, their customer, by the way, the sort of eliminates that risk that they've engaged with a third party, and they'll understand the pressures. You can't do this overnight. So that's often a way that we get around it. I'm conscious of time, and we should be really thinking about potential paths of travel for companies. I'd love to think that we could spend some time one-to-one, just spending a bit more time with a deeper dive to help you. But the best place often for us to start is that sort of gap analysis. We call it sort of a foundation readiness assessment. And we just effectively work with you very, very quickly to establish, how big is the challenge. And then once we've done that, we can quantify the potential amount of time that we may need alongside you. And then it's just really getting that balance between what you do yourself, what we do ourselves, and then the collaboration time. And that's really then what we generally do is give you a fixed price based on that work. And sometimes we find that people don't want to go through the gap analysis or the readiness assessment. They just want to crack on because they're worried about this 6 to 9 months. And they just generally feel that is that extra confidence if they're working with us. So I think that's probably the best place for most people to start. Humperdinck. And then I think the B Corp and EcoVadis, let us help you look at where you are, what clients you're working with, where your business growth is going to be in the future, and align what we believe is the right framework and standard for you to get the best output.